I still remember the steam of everything from that day, and it was the most important day of my life. The day everything I was turned on, the thing that comes back clearest, the thing I can still summon whole when the rest has gone soft and gray with the years, is the steam off the cup, the way it rose wrong. I'll spend this whole telling trying to explain how steam can rise wrong, and I'm not sure I'll manage it, because it's a thing you know in the body before you know it in the head, and the body's knowing doesn't translate into words easily. But I'll try. The steam rose wrong. That's where it starts, and that's where it ends, and everything else is in between. I'm old now. Old enough that the young guards I sometimes see in the town don't believe I was ever one of them. Look at me the way the young always look at the old, as if we were born this way, bent and slow, as if we were never fast, never sharp, never the thing standing between a princess and her death. I was, though. I was all of those once for one afternoon, and the afternoon has lasted me a lifetime. I've lived off it the way you live off one good harvest through a long winter, except my winter's been 40 years, and the harvest was about 4 seconds long. My name is Corin. I was a guard of the household of the Princess Saival, of the kingdom of Vire, in the years when she was young and the court was a nest of snakes the way courts always are. And I served at her table. That was my particular post. The table, the private dining, which sounds like nothing. Sounds like a man standing in a corner watching people eat, and was nothing, 99 days in 100, and was everything on the 100th. I'm going to tell you about the 100th. But you have to understand the 99 first, the long nothing of them, because the nothing is what made me able to see the something. That's the whole secret of it, and I'll give it away now at the start so you don't think this is a story about a hero. I didn't save the princess by being brave or quick or clever. I saved her by having watched the same table do the same things 10,000 times, until the one time it did something different, I felt it before I saw it. That's not heroism. That's just attention, paid over years, finally coming due. But it saved her life, and it took a child's almost, and it's the thing I have to tell before I die, so here it is. The young don't ask me about it. The one time my life mattered, because they don't know to ask. To them, I'm just an old man on a bench in the sun. And old men on benches are scenery, the way I was scenery at a table once, the way the child was scenery in a dining room, all of us the furniture nobody watches. So I'm telling it to no one in particular, to the air, to whoever finds these words after, because a thing this size shouldn't die inside one old skull unspoken. I've held it 40 years. I'm tired of holding it alone. Let me set it down where it can be held by someone else, even a stranger, even you. That's all this is. An old man finally setting down a thing too heavy and too precious to carry into the ground. Bear it with me a while. It won't take long. It's only 4 seconds, really, stretched across a whole life. 4 seconds and a wrong rise of steam and a child's face, and a thing I did that I've never been sure was wisdom and have never once doubted was right. Here it is. The most important thing I ever did, and almost no one ever knew, and I'm running out of time to be the one who knew it, so now you'll know it too. Let me give you the princess, because you should know who it was I served, who it was the cup was meant for. Saival was young then, 19, 20, in the years I'm remembering, and she was not what the songs make princesses. The songs make them gentle and gracious and a little dull, ornaments with crowns. She wasn't. She was sharp and impatient, and she had a temper she mostly kept leashed but that you could feel pacing behind her eyes, and she was clever in a way that frightened the men of the court, because a clever princess is a problem to men who'd rather she were an ornament. She was the king's daughter, the king still living then, though failing, and she was in the line, and there were those who'd rather she weren't, the way there always are. I'll come to them. The point I want to make first is that I didn't love her the way you'd love a gentle thing. I respected her, which is harder and rarer. She was difficult and brilliant and alone in the particular way clever women are alone in courts that fear them, and I'd watched her be that at her table day on day, and I'd come to, I don't know the word, not love exactly, to be on her side, To be in the depth of myself on the side of this difficult, brilliant girl against the whole nest of snakes that wanted her smaller or gone. That mattered later. That being on her side. It's part of why I saw the steam. You see more for someone you've quietly taken the side of. The body watches harder for them. She drank her tea a particular way. This is the kind of thing a table guard knows, the small useless intimacies of watching someone eat and drink for years. She took her tea strong, bitter, no honey, which was unusual. Most of the court drowned theirs in honey, and she'd let it sit a moment before the first sip, always, a particular pause, turning the cup a quarter turn with her fingers while she finished whatever thought she was thinking, and then she'd drink. I knew that pause the way I knew my own breathing. I'd watched it 10,000 times. I didn't know I knew it. That's the thing about the attention paid over years. You don't know you've learned it until the day the pattern breaks and the breaking screams at you. I knew her tea pause the way you know a song so well that a wrong note makes you flinch before you've identified what was wrong. On the 100th day, there was a wrong note, and I flinched before I knew why. The table itself, the room, the ordinary of it, so you can stand in it with me on the day. A small private dining room off the princess's apartments. Not the great hall, not the public table where she ate in state, but the private one, where she took her morning and her afternoon, often alone, sometimes with one or two of her women or a tutor or a guest she wanted to speak with away from the court's ears. Stone like all of it, but warmed tapestries, a good fire, the windows looking east over the kitchen garden so the morning light came in clean. The smells I remember, wood smoke from the fire, the particular smell of the beeswax they polished the long table with, and the food smells, and under it the smell of the princess's tea, which I'd know blind, that strong bitter black smell, no honey. And the people of the room, the small cast of the 99 ordinary days, because one of them is the heart of this and I have to set them all down so you don't see her coming. There was the steward who oversaw the service, a fussy, careful man named Pell. Not a poisoner, I'll tell you now. Pell was nothing but what he seemed, a fussy, careful man, but he's in it. There were the women who served, 2 or 3 who came and went. There was the taster, yes, there was a taster, the princess had a taster, a sour old man named Hod whose whole job was to drink before she drank and eat before she ate and not die. And I'll have a great deal to say about Hod and the taster's art, because the poison got past the taster, and how it got past the taster is the whole black cleverness of the thing. And there was the child. The child. I have to be careful here at the start, because the child is the whole of why this memory has weighed on me for 40 years, and I don't want to give her away too soon, don't want you watching her the way I should have watched her and didn't. So I'll just set her in the room the way she was in the room, unremarkable beneath notice, which was the whole point of her, which was why they used her. A kitchen child. One of the small ones who carry and fetch, who bring the trays up the back stairs from the kitchens, who are so far beneath the notice of a princess's dining room that they're less than furniture. They're not even seen as people. They're just the small hands that the tray arrives on. There was always a kitchen child or two about the edges of the service, carrying, fetching, vanishing. I'd seen 100 of them over the years, never learned their names, never looked at their faces. They were the smallest, least, most invisible part of the whole machine of the table. And that, of course, is exactly why the people who wanted Saival dead reached for one. You don't watch the small hands. Nobody watches the small hands. I'll spend the rest of my life having watched, too late, the small hands. Why I watched so hard? Because a man doesn't learn steam by accident. You'll have wondered, if you've been listening, how a table guard comes to watch a cup so hard he can read its steam. It isn't natural. Most guards at most tables are half asleep on their feet, and rightly, because nothing happens at tables, 99 days in 100, and a man can't hold a knife edge of attention for years without a reason. I had a reason. I'll tell it because it's part of the day, it's underneath the day. It's why my body could move before my mind on the 100th afternoon. When I was young, before Vire, before the princess's table, I served at another table in another house, a lord's house lesser in my green years. And there was a poisoning there, not caught. I was young and half asleep on my feet the way young guards are, and I watched nothing, read nothing, was furniture in the truest, emptiest sense. And a man died at that table, not a great man, the Lord's brother, a decent enough man as I remember him, though the years have worn him to almost nothing. Died at the table I was guarding, of poison I never saw go in a gap I never noticed because I'd never learned that gaps were where death lived. I was not blamed. No one blamed the green guard for failing to see a thing no one expected him to see. But I blamed me. I'd stood at a table and let a man die 3 feet away because I hadn't known to watch, and the not knowing felt like a kind of guilt even though everyone told me it wasn't, and I carried it the way the young carry their first real failure, which is to say I built my whole self around never carrying it again. I learned to watch after that. I made myself learn. Every table I ever stood after that one, I watched the way I should have watched the first, learned the chains, the gaps, the patterns, drank in the taster's art from every old hod I ever served beside, made my attention into the thing it should have been the day the Lord's brother died. 40 years of watching tables as if a man's life hung on it, because once a man's life had hung on it and I'd been asleep. By the time I came to Saival's table, I had decades of that watching built into me, the watching born of an old guilt, and that's what saw the steam. The Lord's brother, dead 3 feet from a sleeping boy, taught the boy to watch so hard that 40 years later the watching saved a princess. The dead man saved the princess, in a way through me, through the guilt he left in me. We're all of us carrying the dead we failed, and sometimes, if we're lucky, the carrying turns into the attention that saves the next one. That's the only redemption I've ever found for the Lord's brother. I couldn't save him, but the failing to save him made me into the man who saved Saival. The dead pay forward sometimes, through the guilt they leave. It's a hard arithmetic, and it's the only one I've got. The 99 days, the long nothing that made the something possible. I keep saying the 99 ordinary days made the 100th possible, and I want to dwell there a moment, because the world doesn't honor the 99, and it should. The long nothing is where the something is grown. Think what it is to stand at a table for years and watch nothing happen. Hour on hour, day on day, season on season, the same room, the same fire, the same princess doing the same small things, the same tea steaming the same right way 10,000 times. It is the most boring work there is. The young guards couldn't stand it. They'd ask to be moved to the gates, the walls, the hunts, anywhere with a bit of life in it, and I never blamed them. The table is a kind of slow death for a young man who wants his life to be happening. But I stayed at the table, year on year, and I'll tell you the secret I learned that the young ones never stayed long enough to learn. The boredom is the training. The watching of 10,000 identical cups is not wasted time. It's the slow writing into the body of what right looks like, so deep and so total that wrong, when it finally comes, announces itself. You cannot see the wrong steam unless you have watched 10,000 cups of right steam so many times you no longer know you're watching. The attention has to become invisible to itself, has to sink below thought, has to become the body's knowledge rather than the mind's, and that only happens through the boredom, through the years, through the 99 days that feel like nothing and are secretly everything. I think about this with the young guards now, the ones in the town who don't believe I was ever one of them. They want their lives to be the 100th day, all of it, every day the day something happens. And I want to tell them, I do tell them when they'll listen, which is rarely, that the 100th day is bought with the 99, that the 4 seconds that save a life are grown in the years of watching nothing, and that the man who can't bear the boredom will never be there, ready, his body already knowing, on the one day it matters. The boredom isn't the absence of the work. The boredom is the work. The watching of the 10,000 right cups is the whole of how you catch the one wrong one. I stood at a table and was bored for years, and the boredom saved a princess. There's no shortcut to it. You can't teach a man to see wrong steam. You can only bore him at a table for long enough that his body learns right steam so deep it screams at wrong. That's the whole craft. Most of it is boredom. The young never believe me. I didn't believe the old hods either at their age. You only learn it by staying. I have to teach you the taster's art before I can tell you the day, because the whole cleverness of what was done turned on it. And if you don't understand how a taster works, you won't understand how the poison got past him and to the very edge of the princess's lips. A taster doesn't just drink the cup. People think that the taster sips everything, and if he doesn't drop dead, it's safe. It's cruder and cleverer than that. Old Hod, the princess's taster, had been at it 40 years, and he'd taught me some of it over the slow hours of the 99 ordinary days, the way old men teach the young things they're proud of. A good taster watches the whole chain. He watches the food prepared when he can. He watches it carried. He drinks, yes, but the drinking is the last and least of it. The real art is the watching, the never letting the cup out of your sight from pore to lip, because most poisonings aren't in the pore, they're in the gap, the unwatched moment between the safe-tasted cup and the princess's hand. The poison goes in after the taste. That's the art of the poisoner and the counterart of the taster. The taster's whole job is to make sure there is no after-the-taste gap, that the cup he drinks from is the exact same cup, untouched, that reaches the lady's hand. Hod was good. 40 years and the princess still living is a taster's whole resume, and Hod had it. But Hod was old that year, older than his art and slowing, and there were moments I'd seen them. I'd noted them with the small worry of a man who watches everything, moments when Hod's eyes left the cup. A breath here and there. The cup tasted, set down, and Hod's old attention drifting for a moment to his own aches, to the fire, to the long boredom of the 99 days before the cup went to the princess. Small gaps. Hod was opening small gaps in the chain, the gaps a younger taster wouldn't have opened, and I'd seen them and worried about them and said nothing, because it wasn't my place to tell the old man his art was slipping, and because nothing had ever come of the gaps had been harmless for years. Someone else had seen the gaps too. That's the thing I understood later. Someone had watched old Hod the way I'd watched him, had seen the same slow opening of the same small gaps, and had built their whole murder in the space of one of them. The poisoners studied the taster the way I studied the table. We were both watching the same old man drift. I was watching out of worry. They were watching out of hunger, and they moved first. The day. I'll slow down now, because the day is 4 seconds long and I've had 40 years to live inside those 4 seconds, and I can stretch them out as long as I like, and I will, because you need them slow. It was an afternoon in autumn. Clear, the east light coming gold through the garden windows, ordinary in every particular. The most ordinary day, which is how these days always are. They don't announce themselves. The worst days wear the same clothes as the dullest. The princess was taking her afternoon alone, no guests, no women lingering, just the service and Hod and me at my post by the wall, and the small hands coming and going with the tray. She was reading something, papers, her mind half on them. In that way she had, present and absent at once. The tea came up. Up the back stairs from the kitchens on the tray, carried by the kitchen child. And here I have to stop and tell you that I noticed nothing about the child. Nothing. She was exactly as invisible to me as every kitchen child before her. A small figure with a tray beneath my notice. And that's the shame I carry, that even watching as hard as I watched, I did not watch the child. Because the whole architecture of who gets watched in a palace had taught me, taught all of us, that the small hands are nothing. The child set the tray. Hod did his art, tasted the tea, the bitter black tea, drank his sip, set the cup down. And then Hod's old attention drifted. The gap opened. The small gap I'd seen open 100 times, harmless 100 times. His eyes went to the fire, just for a breath. And in that breath I didn't see it. That's the terrible thing. I did not see the hand move. It was too small and too fast and too far beneath my notice. In that breath something was done to the cup. And then the cup was lifted toward the princess, set near her hand by the small, invisible servant in its place, exactly where it always went. And the princess reached for it without looking, her mind on her papers, and did her pause, her quarter turn of the cup with her fingers, the thought finishing behind her eyes. And the steam rose wrong. I told you I'd try to explain the wrong steam, and now I have to, because it's the hinge of my whole life and I owe it the attempt. Tea steams. You know how tea steams, it rises off the surface in a particular way, thin, even curling, the way hot water gives itself to cold air. I had watched the princess's tea steam 10,000 times. I knew it steamed the way I knew her pause, the way I knew her bitter no-honey smell. All of it learned without my knowing I'd learned it, the deep attention of the 99 days. And the steam off that cup, that afternoon in the gold east light, rose wrong. It was, I've spent 40 years trying to say it, it was a little too much, and a little too white, and it moved a little too thick, the way steam moves off water that has something in it, something dissolved, something that changes the way the water gives itself to the air. A clean cup of tea steams one way. A cup of tea with something stirred into it steams, very slightly, differently, thicker, whiter, wrong, and you would never see it. No one would ever see it, unless you had watched 10,000 cups of exactly that tea steam exactly the right way, until the right way was written so deep in you that the wrong way screamed. It screamed, that's the only word. The steam rose wrong and something in me screamed before my mind had any idea why, the way you flinch at the wrong note before you've named it. And my body that had watched that table for years, my body moved before my mind gave it leave. The way the best and worst things we do always come from the body moving before the mind. And I crossed that room. I who was never to cross that room. I who was furniture by the wall. I crossed it in 2 strides and I struck the cup from the princess's hand. I struck it from her hand. Her own guard, lunging from the wall, knocking the cup from the princess's fingers as it rose toward her lips. It shattered on the stone. The tea went everywhere, black across the beeswax table and the cold floor, and the room froze, everyone frozen, the princess staring at me with her clever eyes gone wide, the steward Pell with his mouth open, Hod the taster gone gray because he understood instantly what it meant that a cup had to be struck away, that the gap had been used, that his art had failed. And the child, in the frozen room, in the silence after the shatter, my eyes finally, too late but finally, went to the child, the small hands, and the child's face told me everything, because the child's face was the only face in the room that wasn't surprised. Every other face was shock. The child's face was terror, which is different. Terror is the face of someone for whom the worst expected thing has just happened, not the worst unexpected thing. The child knew. In that frozen instant, I looked at the small, invisible servant I'd never once looked at, and I saw a child's face full of a terror that had been there before the cup shattered, a terror that had walked into the room with the tray, and I understood all at once, the whole shape of it, that the poison had come up the back stairs in a small trembling hand, that the least and smallest and most invisible person in the room had been made the instrument, and that whatever I just saved the princess from. I was now looking at the one who'd carried it, and the one who'd carried it was a child, and the child was looking at me with the eyes of someone who knows they're about to die for what they've done. The strike itself slowed all the way down, because 4 seconds can hold a lifetime. I want to go back into the 4 seconds and slow them all the way down, because I've lived in them so long I can stretch them like a man stretching a single coin across a hungry week, and you should feel how long 4 seconds can be when a life hangs in them. The steam rose wrong and the scream went off in me, the wordless body scream, and here is what happened in me in the half-second before I moved, because a great deal happens in a trained body in a half-second. There was a part of me, there's always this part, the part the training fights, that said, wait, be sure. You'll look a fool, an old table guard lunging at the princess's cup over a trick of the light, over steam, over nothing. You'll be the mad guard who attacked his own princess's tea. You'll be dismissed for it, laughed out of the household. And what if you're wrong? What if it's just steam, just the fire, just your tired old eyes? That part was loud. That part is always loud, the part that wants to be sure before it moves, and it's a sensible part. It keeps men from making fools of themselves 100 times a day. But the watching life had taught me the thing that part doesn't know. That by the time you're sure, it's too late. That certainty is a luxury the cup doesn't give you. That the princess's lips were already moving toward the rim, and the time it would take to be sure was time she didn't have. The watching life teaches you to move on the wrongness, not on the certainty, because the wrongness comes seconds before the certainty, and the seconds are the whole of what you've got. So I overruled the sensible part, the be sure part, the don't be a fool part, and I moved on the wrongness alone, on nothing but steam that rose too white, ready to be the mad guard, ready to be dismissed and laughed at, because better the mad guard over a cup of innocent tea than the sane guard over a dead princess. And the crossing of the room, 2 strides, I said, and it was 2 strides, but they were the 2 longest strides of my life, because in them I was committing everything, my place, my name, my dignity, all of it staked on the steam being what my body screamed it was. And there's no calling back a stride like that. Once you've left the wall lunging at the princess, you've already spent your reputation, whether the tea's poisoned or not. The lunge itself is the scandal, and I made the strides knowing it. Knowing that if I was wrong, I was finished, and if I was right, I was finished differently, that either way the old quiet table guard was over the moment I left the wall. And I struck the cup. My hand, an old hand even then, not young, but the body remembered being young. The body found the speed it hadn't had in years for exactly this. My hand took the cup from her fingers as it rose, and the shatter, and the black tea flung across the gold light, and the 4 seconds were over, and I was either a hero or a madman, and I didn't yet know which. And the not knowing, in the frozen instant after the shatter, was the longest moment of all, the moment before the room understood. When I might still have been only the old guard who'd gone mad and ruined a princess's tea. Then Hod went gray, and I knew. Hod's gray face, the taster understanding before anyone that a cup struck away meant a gap used, told me I'd been right, told the whole room, and the 4 seconds resolved at last into rescue instead of madness. But for one long instant after the shatter, I hung between the 2, hero and fool, and I've never forgotten how close they sit. How the same exact act is one or the other depending on a thing you can't know when you commit to it. Every man who moves on the wrongness instead of the certainty lives in that gap between hero and fool, and most of the time the world never lets him find out which he'd have been, because most of the time he waits for certainty and the moment passes. I didn't wait. I got to find out. I was the hero that time. I could so easily have been the fool, and the only difference was the steam, and I'll never be entirely sure even now that I read the steam and didn't just get lucky. That's the last secret. I'm not sure it was skill. It might have been luck wearing skill's clothes, but I moved and she lived, and a man can't ask for more certainty than that the person lived. The living is the only proof I get. It's enough. It has to be. What happens next in a palace when a poisoning is caught, you should know it. So you understand the size of the thing I did, the thing this whole memory is really about. When a poisoning is caught, the machine moves fast, and it moves without mercy, because a court that has just learned an attempt was made on a royal life is a frightened animal, and frightened animals don't think, they bite. The one who carried it is taken, tortured for the names above them, because no one believes a kitchen child acted alone. And they're right not to believe it. The child didn't act alone, but the getting of the names is done with hot iron, and it's done to whoever's hand held the cup, and the hand that held the cup was a child's. And then the one who carried it is killed, publicly, because a court that's been frightened needs to show the world and itself that the price of touching a royal is death, and the death is made an example, and the smaller and more pitiable the example the better, almost, because it teaches that not even a child is spared, that the crown's vengeance reaches all the way down to the smallest hand. That's what would have happened to the child. That's what everyone in that frozen room expected to happen, what the machine was already cranking toward as the shock broke and the shouting started and the guards came running at the noise. The child was, by every law and custom of that court, already dead, already on the iron, already an example. The moment the cup shattered and the child's guilty terror showed, the child's life was over and everyone knew it, and the child knew it most of all, which is why the terror. And I want you to understand who I was in that moment so you understand the weight of what I did. I was the guard who just saved the princess. I was, for those few minutes, the most vindicated man in the kingdom, the hero of the table, the one whose attention had paid off, whose body had moved in time. I had all the standing in the world in that instant, and all the fury too, the righteous fury of a man who'd just seen an attempt on the life of someone he'd quietly taken the side of. By every expectation, I should have been the first to seize the child, to drag the small poisoner forward, to begin the machine of vengeance myself. The princess's own guard, betrayed at his own table by the small hands, I had more cause than anyone to want the child dead. The whole room expected me to be the one who took her. I looked at the child's terrified face, and I did the thing I've spent 40 years not fully understanding and never once regretting. I knelt down. In front of the whole frozen, shouting, cranking to life room, the hero of the moment, the vindicated guard, knelt down in front of the kitchen child on the wet poisoned floor, and instead of seizing her, I put myself between her and the room the way, I didn't think this then, I've thought it since, the way a guard puts himself between anyone and the thing coming to kill them. Because that's what I was, a guard. And in that instant my whole trained body understood before my mind that the thing coming to kill the child was the room, was the machine, was the court's frightened vengeance, and that a guard's whole purpose is to put his body between a defenseless thing and the death coming for it. And the most defenseless thing in that room, the one with death closest to it, was not the princess any more. I'd already saved the princess. It was the child. So I guarded the child, from my own side, from the vengeance that was mine to lead. I knelt on the wet floor and I guarded the poisoner, because the poisoner was a terrified child and I was a guard, and a guard guards the one the death is coming for, and I could not, looking at that face, make the death that was coming for her be a thing I served. Why did I do it? I've asked myself for 40 years, and I'll give you the truest answer I have, which is several answers, because the truth is never just one thing. Part of it was the face. I've talked about the face, the terror, the knowing. A child's face that has been made to do a monstrous thing and knows it and is about to die for it. There is no fury that survives that face, or mine didn't. My righteous fury met that face and died on the spot, because fury needs a villain and that face was not a villain. That face was a victim wearing a villain's deed, and I could see, looking at it, the whole of what must have been done to put that cup in those hands. A child doesn't poison a princess for its own reasons. A child has no reasons of that size. A child poisons a princess because something unbearable has been done to it or threatened against it or someone it loves. Its mother, its small siblings held somewhere, used as the price. That's how you make a child carry poison. You find a child with someone to lose and you threaten the someone, and the child, who would never hurt anyone, carries the cup to save its mother, its brother, whoever the powerful have their hands on. I knew that, kneeling there without being told. I knew the child was the last and least and most coerced link in a chain that ran up and up into the court, into the snakes, into people who'd never carry their own poison and never would be caught carrying it, who'd reach down to the smallest hand precisely because the smallest hand would be the one that hung for it while they dined on, untouched. To kill the child was to do the snake's last work for them, to let them spend a child and walk away clean. I would not. That was part of it. I would not do the snake's cleanup. I would not let the small hand hang while the smooth hands ate. And part of it, I'll be honest, the whole truth part of it was that I just learned, in the 4 seconds at the table, what my whole life of watching was for. I'd watched for years and learned the table so deep that I'd saved a life by the wrongness of steam. And I understood, kneeling there, that the same deep watching that let me see the wrong steam also let me see the wrong story everyone else was about to tell, the story where the child was the villain. Everyone else saw a poisoner. I who'd watched the small hands be invisible for years, who knew exactly how little a kitchen child is and how much it can be made to do by people who own its family. I saw the truth under the story. My attention had caught the steam, and my attention caught the child, the real child, the coerced, terrified instrument. Under the villain, the room needed her to be. And once you've seen the truth under a story, you can't unsee it, and you can't serve the story. You can only serve the truth, even when the truth is going to cost you everything, which it did. How the snakes worked, the coercion, because the real villains never touched the cup. I've called them snakes and waved them off as dust, and they are dust, but I should say one true thing about how they worked, because it's the thing that turned my fury from the child to them, and it's a thing worth knowing about how the powerful do their worst. They never touched the cup. That's the whole art of the powerful villain, never to touch the thing yourself, always to find a hand beneath you to touch it, a hand poor enough and frightened enough and owned enough to do the touching, so that when the thing is caught, it's the low hand that's caught and the high hand that's clean. The lords who wanted Saival dead were never anywhere near that tea. They were in their apartments in the great hall, visible, alibied, clean, while a kitchen child carried their murder up a back stair. And they'd arranged it so that even if it were caught, even if some watching guard read the steam, which they couldn't have predicted, but even so, even if it were caught, the catching would stop at the child. The child would hang. The child would be tortured for names, but a frightened 8-year-old has no names that matter, knows nothing but the faceless men who threatened her mother. And so the chain would break at the child, and the lords would be forever safe above the break. They'd built it so the child was both the weapon and the shield, the weapon that carried the poison and the shield that would absorb the vengeance, leaving them untouched on both counts. That's the cleverness of evil with power. It spends the powerless twice, once to do the deed and once to take the blame, and keeps its own hands clean through both. And that's what turned me, kneeling on the floor. Because I understood, looking at the terrified child, that to let the machine take her was to complete the snake's design, to be the final piece of their cleverness, the guard who closes the chain at the child exactly as they'd planned. My fury wanted a villain, and the room offered me the child, and if I'd taken the child, the snakes would have won completely, would have killed the princess's would-be killer and walked away clean, the perfect crime even in its failure. The only way to beat them, the only way, was to refuse the child as villain, to keep the child alive and follow the chain past her, up to the clean high hands, which is exactly what would terrify them, because their whole safety depended on the chain breaking at the child. A living child was a thread that led up. A hanged child was a thread cut clean. So mercy wasn't only mercy, kneeling there. Mercy was also the only strategy that could reach the real villains. To save the child was to refuse the snakes their shield, to keep the thread that led to them, to turn their own cleverness against them. The princess saw that, clever as she was, the moment I knelt, saw that mercy and justice pointed the same way for once, that sparing the child was also the only road to the lords. Usually mercy and justice pull against each other. That once they pulled together. Spare the child and you also catch the snakes. It's the rarest alignment there is, and we were granted it that day. And we took it, and it worked. And the snakes who'd spent a child to stay clean were unmade by the child they couldn't manage to get hanged. There's a justice in that I've warmed my hands at for 40 years. It cost me. I'll tell you the cost plainly, because mercy is never free and I won't pretend mine was. The princess, I have to tell you about the princess here because everything turned on her, on what she did in the next few minutes, and it's the reason I loved her, properly loved her from that day to this. The room was screaming for the child's blood. The guards had the child. The machine was cranking. And I was on the floor, a guard out of his place, shielding a poisoner, which is itself a kind of treason. A guard taking the side of the hand that tried to kill the one he guards. I'd saved her and damned myself in the same 4 seconds. The saving and the damning the same act almost. because no sooner had I struck the cup away than I was kneeling between the court and the poisoner. And a guard who shields a poisoner is a guard who's chosen the assassin over the crown, by the letter of it. And there were those in the room already saying it, already turning, the way the court turns. And the princess stopped it. Saival. She'd been a breath from death. She had every reason to want the child torn apart. The righteous fury that had died in me was hers by every right, hers most of all. And she looked at me kneeling there shielding the child, and she looked at the child, and she did the thing that told me everything about who she really was under the difficult, brilliant, frightening surface the court so feared. She was clever, I told you. Clever enough to see, fast, what I'd seen, that a kitchen child doesn't poison a princess for itself, that the child was a link and not the chain, that the real enemies were the smooth hands who'd reached down to the small one. And she was something rarer than clever, which I hadn't known until that moment. She was merciful, in a court that had no use for mercy and would read it as weakness. She stopped the room. She used the cold, quiet voice. I've heard that voice used for cruelty in another life, another telling, but she used it for mercy, and she stopped the machine. And she ordered the child taken not to the iron but to her own protection. And she ordered instead that the chain be followed upward, quietly, carefully, to the smooth hands, by following the child's fear back to whatever they held over it. She chose to save the child and catch the snakes both, the harder, cleverer mercy, instead of the easy vengeance of a small hanging. She was magnificent. I have served the memory of that mercy for 40 years. The truth, when they followed it up, was what I'd known kneeling on the floor, and worse, the way the truth always is. The child had a mother, sick in the lower town, and a younger brother, small. And the snakes, it was a faction of the court, lords who wanted Saival out of the line, the usual nest. I'll not bother you with their names. They're dust now, and they were nothing then but hunger in good clothes. The snakes had found this kitchen child with her sick mother and her small brother, and they'd done the simple, monstrous thing: carry this cup or they die. The mother and the brother watched the price. And the child, 8 years old, I learned, 8, had carried the cup to save her mother and her brother, had walked up the back stairs with poison and a tray and a terror she couldn't show, and had tipped it into the gap in old Hod's attention because she'd been told exactly how, because the snakes had studied the taster the same as I had, and had used the child to do the thing in the gap, and had meant for the child to hang for it after, the perfect arrangement. The poisoner's forever clean, and a small body on the gallows to close the case. Saival broke it. She followed the child's fear to the mother and brother, freed them, protected them, and followed the chain up to the lords, and dealt with the lords the way clever, merciful princesses deal with such things. Not with a public bloodbath that would have made martyrs and shown the court her hand, but quietly over the following year, a removal here, a disgrace there, the nest unmade strand by strand without ever once putting the word poison in front of the court, so that the snakes simply, mysteriously, lost their footing one by one and were gone, and no one outside a tiny circle ever knew there'd been an attempt at all. The princess lived. The snakes fell. The child lived. That's the thing. The child lived with her mother and her brother under the princess's quiet protection, given a place far from the court and the kitchens and the small hands, given a life, because a guard knelt on a wet floor instead of seizing her, and a princess chose mercy instead of the easy hanging. That's what we did, Saival and I, in the 4 seconds and the minutes after. We saved 2 lives that day, not one. The princess everyone remembers. And the child no one ever knew about, who is the one I actually think about all these years, the small hand I knelt to guard. Old Hod, the taster whose gap let the poison through, and what it did to him. I have to tell you about Hod because the gap was his, and a man's gap that nearly kills a princess is a thing that man has to live with, and Hod lived with it, and how he lived with it is part of this. Hod was not at fault, not really, not the way the court briefly wanted him to be when they needed someone to blame, and a guard-shielded child wasn't going to satisfy them. Hod was old, and his art had slowed, and the gap he'd opened was the gap age opens in everyone. The slow drift of attention that comes for all of us. That's coming for me now as I tell you this. My own attention drifting down side roads of memory the way Hod's drifted to the fire. The snakes had used his age against him, had studied his slowing the way they'd studied everything, had built their murder in the gap his years had opened. That's not Hod's fault any more than getting old is anyone's fault. But Hod didn't see it that way, because the gap was his, the poison went through his gap, and a taster whose gap nearly killed his princess is a taster who's failed at the one thing his whole life was for, and Hod was too old and too proud to forgive himself a thing like that. He resigned his post within the month, wouldn't be talked out of it. The princess herself, who'd understood at once that it wasn't Hod's fault, who'd have kept him, couldn't talk him out of it. Hod said a taster who's opened a gap once will open it again, that his time was done, that he'd not stand between her and the cup another day knowing his attention could no longer be trusted. And there was no arguing with him because he was right. That was the terrible thing. He was right. His time was done. And he knew it before anyone had to tell him. He went off to a small place in the country the princess gave him, and he died there a few years on, an old man who'd guarded a princess from poison for 40 years and remembered only the one cup he'd let through. That's the curse of the watching life. You remember the failures. 40 years of cups caught, and Hod died remembering the one that nearly wasn't, the way I'll die remembering the Lord's brother I couldn't save. The way every man whose work is to prevent the terrible thing remembers only the times the terrible thing nearly came, never the 1,000 quiet times it didn't. We don't get to keep the 1,000 saves. We only keep the one near miss. Hod kept his gap till he died. I've kept the child till I'm dying. The watching life is a life of carrying the one that almost got through forever, and never being allowed to set it down, because the setting it down is the slackening that lets the next one through, and you'd rather carry it forever than slacken once. Hod carried his gap to the grave. I understood him. I'm carrying mine there now. The aftermath, the few who knew, the many who didn't, and the strangeness of an unknown rescue. Here's a strange thing about saving a life in the quiet way we saved Saival's. Almost no one ever knew. Because the princess unmade the snakes quietly, over a year, without ever naming the poison, the whole thing stayed sealed inside a tiny circle. The court never knew there'd been an attempt. The kingdom never knew their princess had been 4 seconds from death over an autumn cup. The songs the realm sings about Saival, and they do sing them, she became a great queen in the end, ruled long and well and is remembered. The songs don't have this in them. Don't have the cup or the steam or the child or the kneeling guard, because it was all sealed, all quiet, all unmade in the dark the way clever rulers unmake things. And so I'm a man who saved a queen and almost no one ever knew it, and I find this surprised me over the years. I find I don't mind. I thought I'd mind. A young man would have minded terribly, would have wanted the song, the credit, the standing. The old man I became doesn't mind at all because I learned that the saving was the thing, not the being known to have saved, that a life pulled back from the edge is exactly as saved whether or not anyone sings about it, and that the quiet of it, the no one knowing, is almost cleaner, almost better, a thing done for its own sake and not for the song. Saival knew. I knew. The child knew. Hod knew. A handful of others, that's all. And it's enough. It's more than enough. The rescue doesn't need an audience to be real. It only needs to have happened, and it happened, and the queen lived 40 more years and ruled well, and the child grew up. And those things are true whether or not a single song was ever sung, and I've made my peace with the silence around it, have come to prefer the silence, because the silence means we did it for her and the child and not for ourselves. What became of the child, the part I most need to tell, the reason for all the rest? I said the child is the one I think about, all these years, and I have to tell you what became of her, because it's the heart of why this memory has weight, and because it's the only part with any sweetness in it, and I've earned a little sweetness this far into a hard telling. She lived, I said that. Under the princess's quiet protection, she and her mother and her small brother were taken far from the court, given a place, A real place, in a town in the West where no one knew what the child had nearly done and nearly died for. The mother recovered the sickness that the snakes had used as a lever turned out to be a thing a good physician could mend. Once there was coin for a good physician, and the princess saw there was coin. The brother grew. And the child, she grew too, of course, children do. The terrified 8-year-old with the tray became, in time, a woman with a life, with her own children eventually. A whole life grown in the space a hanging would have taken. The space a kneeling guard and a merciful princess held open for her. I saw her once more. Only once, years later when she was grown. I'll not say how it came about, it doesn't matter, but I found myself in that western town in my older years, and I sought her out, not to trouble her, just to see, the way you go to see a thing you once saved to know it's still standing. And she was a grown woman with a child on her hip, and she didn't know me at first, and then she did. She looked at my old face and something moved in hers and she knew me, the guard who'd knelt. The one face in that frozen room that hadn't come to kill her. And she didn't say much. Neither of us did. We were never people of many words, she and I. We'd met in a silence and we honored it. But she looked at me a long moment with the child on her hip, the child that existed because she'd been let live. And she did a thing I carry next to the wrong steam, as the two things I'll take to my grave. She shifted the child on her hip and she reached out and she touched the back of my old hand. Once the way a kitchen child had not touched my hand 40 years before. The way I'd never been touched by any of the small hands I'd failed to watch. She touched the back of my hand once, the grown woman, and it was thank you and it was I lived and it was look, here is another life. The one on my hip that exists because you knelt. And then she took her child inside and that was all and it was everything. And I walked out of that western town lighter than I'd walked in 40 years. Because the small hand I'd knelt to guard had grown into a hand that could hold its own child. And there is no song in any kingdom worth more than that. The princess, after who she became, and the one time we spoke of it. Saival became queen. I told you. The old king died, and the line held despite the snakes who tried to break it, and she came to the throne and ruled Vire for a long time and ruled it well, and the kingdom remembers her as a great queen, hard and clever and just, the kind of ruler a kingdom is lucky to get once in a few generations. The court that had feared her clever, difficult girlhood learned to fear her clever, difficult crown, and the fearing kept them honest mostly. And Vire prospered under the woman the snakes had tried to poison out of the way. I served her, through the early years of it until I grew too old for the table, and then she pensionied me kindly and I came to the town where I've grown old, and that was the most of our acquaintance, a guard and his queen proper, distant, what it should be. But we spoke of it once. The cup. Years after, when she was queen and I was getting old, she had me brought to her privately, which never happened. A queen doesn't summon an old table guard for a private word, and she spoke of the day. She remembered all of it, the steam, the shatter, my crossing the room, my kneeling. And she told me a thing I've kept. She said that in the moment I knelt, when the hero of the table got down on the wet floor and shielded the child instead of seizing her, she had learned something that shaped her whole reign. She said she'd been about to be merciful from cleverness, from the cold calculation that a hanged child makes a martyr and a followed child catches snakes, that her mercy, left to itself, would have been a strategy. And that seeing me kneel, seeing a guard shield a poisoner not from calculation but from simple refusal to let a child die, had turned her cold, clever mercy into something warmer, had taught her that mercy could be a thing you did because it was right and not only because it was clever, and that she'd tried, all her reign, to remember the guard on the wet floor, to be merciful from the heart and not only from the strategy. She said I'd taught a queen mercy by kneeling. I don't know if that's true or if it's the kind thing a great queen says to an old servant near the end. But she said it and I've kept it, and if it's true then the 4 seconds at the table did more than save her life. They shaped how she used the 40 years of life they bought her, and a whole kingdom was ruled a little more mercifully because a guard couldn't bear to let a child hang. I'd like that to be true. I let myself believe it on the good days. On the bad days, I think she was only being kind to an old man. Either way, she said it, and it's mine now, and I'll take it to the grave with the steam and the child's grown hand on mine. Why I tell it now, the old man's reason, the last of it. I'm telling it now because I'm dying. There's no drama in saying it. I'm old, the body's failing the ordinary way, and a man near the end takes stock of what he carried and what he'll leave. And I find that of everything in a long life, this is the thing I most don't want to die unspoken, not the saving of the princess, that's safe enough. That's in the sealed record somewhere even if no song has it. The thing I don't want to die unspoken is the child, because the child is in no record. The sealed account of the poisoning, if it survives anywhere, has a kitchen child as the instrument and the princess's mercy as a footnote, but it doesn't have the child as a person, doesn't have her terror or her sick mother or her small brother or the snakes that used her or the life she grew into in the western town. The records keep the princess. They don't keep the child. And I'm the last one who carries the child whole, the only one left who knelt on that floor and saw the real child under the villain the room needed her to be. And if I die without telling it, the child vanishes from the world's memory entirely, becomes forever just the poisoner, dealt with. And that's a second injustice on top of all the others done to her, to be remembered, if at all, as the thing she was forced to be and not the child she was. So I've told it, for her, the way a guard in another tale I once heard wrote down a dead driver's letter so the man would exist somewhere outside his own coat. I've written down the child so she'll exist somewhere outside the sealed record's cold word poisoner. She was 8. She had a sick mother and a small brother. She was made to carry death up a back staircase to save the people she loved, and she did it terrified, and she was meant to hang for it while the smooth hands ate, and instead she lived because a princess was merciful and a guard knelt, and she grew into a woman with a child on her hip who touched an old man's hand once in a western town. That's who she was, not the poisoner, that child. I've put it down now so it's not only in me, so when I go it doesn't go with me. That's the whole reason. The princess can keep her songs. I wanted the child to have these few pages, this one place in all the world's words where she's a person and not a footnote. She's got them now. It's the last thing I had to give, and I've given it. The steam, last where I started, where I'll end. I'll end where I began, with the steam, because a memory like this should close its own circle. I still see it. The wrong steam, rising too white and too thick off a cup in the gold east light, 40 years ago, the small wrongness that screamed, the 4 seconds my whole life turned on. I see it more clearly than I see the room I'm sitting in now, which is the way of old men, the far things clearer than the near. And I've come to think the steam is the whole lesson of my life, if a life has a lesson, which I'm not sure it does. The steam was a small thing, the smallest thing. A barely visible wrongness in the way hot water gave itself to cold air, that 10,000 days of boredom had taught my body to read. And everything, the princess's life, the queen she became, the kingdom she ruled, the child saved, the mercy taught, everything turned on one man having watched closely enough, for long enough, with enough love for the difficult girl at the table, to see a small thing rise wrong. That's the whole of what I have to leave you. Watch closely. Watch the small things. Watch the steam and watch the small hands, the two together, the wrongness that screams and the child that everyone's trained not to see. Pay the boring attention, the 99 days of it, because the 100th day comes wearing the same dull clothes as all the rest, and only the watcher who never stopped watching will catch it. And when you catch it, when your watching pays off and you've saved the great person everyone will remember, kneel down after and look for the small hand that carried it, the one no one's watching, the one the room needs to be a villain, and see if it isn't a child, and if it is, guard it. Guard the small hand from the vengeance that's yours to lead. That's the whole of what I learned in 4 seconds and 40 years. Watch the steam. Kneel for the child. Everything else is just the long boredom in between, and the boredom is the work. And the work is worth it, for the one cup, for the one child, For the one time your whole watching life comes due and you're there, ready, your body already moving, because you never once stopped watching the small things rise. Corin, once a guard of the table in the kingdom of Vire, setting it down at the end so the child won't vanish. She was 8. She lived. That's the song if there's a song. She lived.